The snow that night wasn't just falling. It was hunting. In the unforgiving winter of 1884, the moors of northern England were a graveyard for the unprepared. But what the Duke of Blackwood found buried in a drift that night wasn't a lost sheep or a fallen branch. It was a woman. She was half frozen, her skin blue against the ice, wearing nothing but a torn, blood-stained nightgown. Who was she? Why did she have the hands of an aristocrat but the wounds of a prisoner? And why, when she finally opened her eyes, was her first instinct to scream at the sight of her savior? This is the story of how a frozen heart melted the snow, and how a secret buried in the winter could burn down an entire dynasty. The horse snorted, a plume of white steam erupting into the biting air. Anton Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood, tightened his grip on the leather reins, his gloved hands numb despite the heavy wool of his riding coat. He shouldn't have been out here. No sane man rode the perimeter of the Blackwood estate in a blizzard that threatened to swallow the sky whole. But Anton had never claimed to be a sane man. He was a man possessed by solitude, a man who preferred the howling wind to the insipid chatter of London ballrooms. He urged his stallion, Onyx, toward the southern ridge. The local villagers called him the Lord of Winter, a nickname earned not just by the location of his ancestral home, but by the coldness of his demeanor. At 32, Anton was the sole heir to a massive fortune and a title that commanded respect. Yet he lived like a hermit in a castle that was slowly crumbling under the weight of its own history. "Easy, boy," Anton muttered as Onyx shied away from a dark shape near the old stone wall. Anton squinted against the stinging snowflakes. He assumed it was a fallen log, or perhaps a dead deer, but as he drew closer, the shape resolved into something that made his blood run colder than the wind. It was a patch of pale silk, and sticking out from the silk was a hand. "Whoa!" Anton pulled the horse up sharply and vaulted out of the saddle, his boots sinking deep into the drift. He waded through the snow, his heart hammering a rhythm of dread against his ribs. When he reached the bundle, he fell to his knees. It was a woman. She was curled into a fetal position, half buried. Her hair, a tangled mess of copper and ice, was plastered across her face. But it was her attire that shocked him the most. She was wearing a nightgown, or what was left of one. The fabric was sheer, expensive lace, but it had been shredded. A long tear ran from the hem to her hip, exposing a leg that was marble white and marred with fresh scratches. There were bruises on her arms, dark, purple fingerprints that spoke of a violent grip. "Miss?" Anton shouted over the wind, shaking her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" She was solid ice. Her lips were a terrifying shade of violet. For a moment, Anton thought he was looking at a corpse. He reached out, pressing 2 fingers against the hollow of her throat. For 10 agonizing seconds, he felt nothing. Then, a flutter, weak, erratic, like a dying bird trapped in a cage. She's alive. But barely. He didn't think. He didn't consider the impropriety or the scandal or the mud staining his breeches. Anton scooped her up. She was frighteningly light, a featherweight of bone and freezing flesh. Her head lolled back, exposing a dark gash on her temple where the blood had frozen into a jagged ruby line. "Hang on," he growled, more to himself than to her. He carried her to Onyx, struggling to mount the nervous horse with the unconscious woman in his arms. He wrapped his heavy riding cloak around her, buttoning it to trap whatever heat his own body could offer. She smelled of lavender soap and metallic blood. The ride back to Blackwood Manor was a race against the Reaper. Anton rode harder than he ever had, ignoring the treacherous ice beneath the hooves. Every time her head bumped against his chest, he checked her breathing. It was getting shallower. When the looming iron gates of the manor appeared through the whiteout, Anton let out a roar. "Open the gates! Now!" The sleepy gatekeeper, old Thomas, stumbled out of his lodge, lantern swinging wildly. When he saw the Duke charging through with a bundle in his arms, his jaw dropped. Anton didn't stop until he reached the main steps. He slid off the horse his legs trembling from the adrenaline. The massive oak doors flew open before he could shout, revealing Mrs. Fairfax, the housekeeper, her face a mask of stern concern. "Your Grace," she gasped, seeing the bundle. "Get Dr. Sterling," Anton barked, storming into the foyer, trailing snow and mud onto the pristine marble. "And get hot water, blankets and brandy. Now, Mrs. Fairfax. She is dying." "Who is she?" the housekeeper asked, rushing to follow him as he took the stairs 2 at a time. Anton looked down at the pale face against his chest, the copper hair now dripping melting snow onto his cravat. He saw the high cheekbones, the delicate jawline. She was beautiful, in a tragic, broken way. "I don't know," Anton whispered, kicking open the door to the master guest suite. "But whoever did this to her is going to pay." The fire in the hearth roared like a trapped beast, casting long, dancing shadows across the velvet canopy of the bed. It had been 6 hours since Anton had brought the stranger in from the cold. Dr. Sterling, a balding man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a permanent smell of antiseptic, snapped his medical bag shut. He looked grave. Anton stood by the window, staring out at the relentless storm. He had changed out of his wet riding gear and was now wearing a dry shirt and waistcoat, though he hadn't bothered to tie his cravat. He felt exposed, raw. "Well?" Anton asked, not turning around. "She is lucky, Your Grace," Dr. Sterling said, wiping his hands on a towel. "Hypothermia has set in deeply, but her core temperature is rising. The frostbite on her toes and fingers is superficial. She won't lose them. But—" Anton turned. "But what?" "The other injuries," Sterling said, lowering his voice. "The gash on her head. She was struck. Hard. And the bruising on her arms and elsewhere. Someone tried to restrain her. Violently. She didn't just get lost in the snow, Your Grace. She was fleeing something. Or someone." Anton's jaw tightened. "Did she say anything?" "She is delirious. She keeps murmuring a name. Santiago." "And begging him to stop." Santiago. The name meant nothing to Anton, but the fear in the doctor's voice made his blood boil. "Keep her sedated if she is in pain," Anton ordered. "Mrs. Fairfax will sit with her tonight." "I will stay until morning," Sterling nodded. Anton couldn't sleep. He spent the night in the library, pacing, unable to shake the image of the woman in the snow. Why was she in a nightgown? The nearest estate was the crumbling Chesterfield Hall, 10 miles away, but that place had been empty for years. Was she a traveler whose carriage was waylaid? A kept woman thrown out by a lover? Just before dawn, a scream shattered the silence of the manor. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure terror. Anton dropped his glass of brandy and sprinted up the stairs. He burst into the guest room just as Mrs. Fairfax was trying to restrain the woman. She was awake. She was thrashing against the sheets, her eyes wide and wild, the pupils blown huge with panic. She wasn't seeing the luxurious room. She was seeing a nightmare. "No, no, please," she shrieked, her voice raspy. "I won't sign it. You can't make me." "Miss, you are safe," Mrs. Fairfax soothed, looking terrified. The woman scrambled backward, pressing herself against the mahogany headboard, pulling the duvet up to her chin as if it were a shield. Her eyes darted around the room, finally landing on Anton, who stood in the doorway. She froze. Her chest heaved. She looked at his size, his dark hair, the intensity of his gaze. "Did he send you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Did Santiago send you to finish it?" Anton stepped forward slowly, hands raised, palms open. "I don't know who Santiago is, miss. My name is Anton Thorne. I found you in the snow. You are at Blackwood Manor. You are safe." The woman blinked, tears spilling over her lashes. She looked down at her hands, clean, bandaged, warm. Then she looked back at Anton. The adrenaline seemed to drain out of her all at once. "Blackwood," she murmured. The Duke?" "Yes," Anton said softly. She let out a choked sob and buried her face in her hands. "He will find me. He always finds me." Anton sat on the edge of the bed, a breach of protocol he didn't care about. "Who will find you?" She lowered her hands. Her eyes were a striking shade of green, like polished jade, but filled with a haunted depth. She looked at Mrs. Fairfax, then at Anton. She seemed to be calculating, deciding how much truth she could afford. "My name," she hesitated, her voice barely audible. "My name is Carmen. I am a governess." Anton narrowed his eyes. He had seen her hands. They were soft, uncalloused. She wore no ring, but there was a faint indentation on her ring finger, pale skin, where a band had recently been removed. And her accent, it was refined, educated, the King's English without a trace of the lower classes. She was lying. "A governess," Anton repeated, his tone neutral. "And who employs you, Carmen?" "A family. In the south. I was traveling to a new post. Our carriage, we were set upon by highwaymen. I ran." It was a clumsy lie. Highwaymen didn't leave a woman in a nightgown. They took the jewelry and left. They didn't bruise a woman's arms as if dragging her to an altar, but Anton saw the terror radiating off her. Pushing her now would only make her retreat further. "Very well, Carmen," Anton said, standing up. "Rest now. No one enters this estate without my permission, highwayman, or this. Santiago, you are under the protection of the House of Blackwood now." As he turned to leave, she spoke again. "Your Grace?" He paused at the door. "Yes?" "Thank you," she whispered, "for not leaving me to the frost." Anton nodded once and left the room. But as he walked down the corridor, his mind was racing. She was no governess. She was a woman of breeding, fleeing a scandal or a crime. And by keeping her here, by lying for her, he was inviting that scandal onto his own doorstep. He went to his study and pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment. He dipped his quill in ink. He needed to send a letter to his solicitor in London. He needed to find out if any high-born women had gone missing recently. Specifically, women connected to a man named Santiago. The ink was still wet when he heard the sound of carriage wheels on the gravel drive below. Anton walked to the window. The storm had broken, leaving the world blindingly white. Below, a black carriage drawn by 4 lathered horses had pulled up. It bore a crest on the door, a crest Anton recognized vaguely, a serpent coiled around a dagger, the crest of Baron Santiago Vane, a man known in London for his gambling debts and his violent temper. Anton watched as a man stepped out of the carriage. He was tall, thin, with a cane that looked more like a weapon. He didn't look like a worried relative. He looked like a hunter who had tracked his prey. Anton's hands curled into fists. The woman upstairs, Carmen, or whatever her real name was, hadn't even been awake for an hour, and already the wolves were at the door. He glanced at the letter on his desk, then crumpled it up and threw it into the fire. He wouldn't need a solicitor to find the truth. The truth had just arrived. Anton buttoned his waistcoat, checked the small pistol he kept in his desk drawer, and tucked it into his pocket. Then he walked out to greet his guest. Anton descended the grand staircase, each step deliberate, the pistol heavy and cold in his pocket. The foyer of Blackwood Manor was a cavernous space of stone and shadow, currently occupied by Baron Santiago Vane. Up close, Vane was even more unpleasant than his reputation suggested. He was a man built of sharp angles and expensive tailoring. His eyes, the color of watery mud, scanned the room with an air of arrogant appraisal, resting finally on the Duke. He did not bow. He merely tapped his cane against the marble floor, a rhythmic, irritating sound. "Blackwood," Vane said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone that barely concealed a sneer. "I didn't expect to find you resident. Rumor had it you were rotting away in solitude." "Rumor is often disappointed, Vane," Anton replied, stopping on the last step, ensuring he towered slightly over the Baron. "To what do I owe the misfortune of this visit?" The roads are treacherous." "Indeed they are." Vane peeled off his leather gloves, revealing pale, spider-like hands. "I am in pursuit of a runaway. A thief, actually. And a madwoman. My carriage tracks led me near your perimeter wall." Anton's face remained a granite mask. "A thief? What was stolen?" "My peace of mind. And property that belongs to me." Vane stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "My wife, Blackwood. She fled our bedchamber last night in a fit of hysteria. She is unwell in the mind. Prone to delusions, she ran out into the blizzard wearing nothing but her shift. I fear she may have succumbed to the elements, but if by some miracle she found her way here—" Anton felt a sickening twist in his gut. Wife. If the woman upstairs was legally Vane's wife, Anton had very little standing to keep her. In the eyes of 1880s law, she was Vane's property, much like his horse or his cane. "I have many people on my estate, Vane. I do not keep a tally of every lost soul who wanders by." Vane's eyes narrowed into slits. "Don't play games with me, Anton. I saw the steam rising from your stables. A horse was ridden hard last night, and your housekeeper looked as though she'd seen a ghost when I arrived." He leaned in, his breath smelling faintly of opium and expensive sherry. "She is here, Lady Carmen, and I want her back. Lady Carmen." The pieces clicked into place. Not a governess. Lady Carmen Stanhope, daughter of the late Earl of Stanhope. An heiress of immense fortune, recently orphaned. The gossip rags in London had mentioned her sudden engagement to Vane just a month prior, a match many deemed grotesque, given Vane's reputation as a fortune hunter and a brute. If Lady Carmen Stanhope were here, Anton said carefully, choosing his words like a barrister, she would be under the protection of my roof until such time as her health and safety could be ascertained. If she was found half frozen, as you suggest, she would hardly be fit for travel. Vane laughed, a sharp, barking sound devoid of humor. Protection? From her lawful husband? You tread on dangerous ground, Duke. You are obstructing my marital rights. That woman is a disturbed creature. She requires firm hands and the solitude of my estate to recover her senses. If you do not produce her, I will return with the local magistrate and a warrant. Then do so, Anton challenged, his voice dropping an octave to a low growl. He stepped forward, invading Vane's personal space, until the smaller man had to tilt his head back to look him in the eye. Bring the magistrate. Bring the entire constabulary. But know this, Santiago. If I find that any harm has come to a woman on my land, husband or not, the man responsible will answer to me. And I am not known for my mercy. The threat hung heavy in the freezing air between them. Vane held Anton's gaze for a long, tense moment. He saw something in the Duke's dark eyes, a savagery that matched his own, but backed by vastly more power and wealth. Vane blinked first. Very well, Vane spat, pulling his gloves back on. Play the white knight. Keep her warm for me. But mark my words, Blackwood. She is mine, and she has something else of mine. I will have both back, or I will burn this crumbling pile of rocks down around your ears. Vane spun on his heel and marched out the door to his waiting carriage. Anton watched him go, his hand tight around the pistol in his pocket. He hadn't needed to use it, but the war had just begun. Vane was gone, but he had left poison in his wake. Wife. Anton turned and headed back up the stairs, taking them two at a time. He needed the truth, and he needed it now. Anton didn't knock this time. He entered the guest suite, closing the door firmly behind him and locking it. The distinct click of the lock made the woman in the bed jump violently. She was sitting up, propped against pillows, looking marginally better than she had hours ago. The color was returning to her cheeks, though it only served to highlight the stark terror in her jade-green eyes when she saw Anton's expression. He was here, she whispered. It wasn't a question. Yes. Anton walked to the fireplace, standing with his back to the flames, watching her. Baron Santiago Vane. He claims he is looking for his wife. Lady Carmen Vane. She flinched as if he'd struck her. No, she gasped. Not his wife. Never his wife. He claims, Anton continued, his voice devoid of inflection, attempting to keep his own rising anger in check, that you are hysterical, delusional, that you ran from his bed in a fit of madness. He lies! She threw the covers back, scrambling out of bed despite her weakness. She stood before him in an oversized dressing gown Mrs. Fairfax had found, shaking from head to foot. Look at me, Your Grace. Do these look like the marks of hysteria? She shoved up the sleeves of the gown, thrusting her arms toward him. The bruises he had seen earlier were darkening, clear imprints of cruel fingers bearing down with immense force. He tried to force me, she cried, the tears finally breaking free, hot and fast. Last night, he came to my room. He had a priest, a man he paid to act as a priest, waiting in the library below. He tried to drag me down there to marry him right then. When I refused, when I fought him, he tore my gown. He struck my head against the wall. She touched the bandage on her temple with trembling fingers. I wriggled free. I didn't think. I just ran. Out the terrace doors, into the snow. I would rather have frozen to death and let him touch me again, than let him own me. Anton looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't a shivering victim anymore. She was a woman fighting for her very existence. The fire in her eyes matched the copper of her hair. He believed her. Every word. The story Vane told was the lie of a predator trying to recapture his prey. You are Lady Carmen Stanhope, he stated softly. She nodded miserably. Yes, my father died 3 months ago. Santiago. He was my father's friend. He took over the management of the estate. He isolated me. He told everyone I was grief-stricken and unable to manage my own affairs. He needs my inheritance to pay his gambling debts in London. He owes thousands to men far worse than himself. Anton felt a murderous rage toward Santiago Vane pooling in his veins. He stepped toward Carmen. She flinched backward, a conditioned response to male proximity. Anton stopped immediately, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Carmen, he said, using her true name for the first time. It felt strange on his tongue, intimate. You are safe here. I sent him away. I told him if he wanted you, he would have to bring a magistrate. Her relief was short-lived. Her eyes widened in horror. A magistrate? No, Your Grace! You don't understand. The law will side with him. He has papers. Forged, but they will look real. They will say he is my legal guardian until we marry. If a magistrate comes, you will have to hand me over. I will hand over nothing, Anton growled. I am the Duke of Blackwood. My word carries weight in this county. Not against the law of guardianship. You don't know what he is capable of. She rushed toward him, grabbing the lapels of his coat in desperation. It's not just the money. It's why he killed my father. The room went deathly silent. The only sound was the crackle of the fire, and Carmen's ragged breathing. Anton covered her small, cold hands with his own, holding them against his chest. What did you say? My father didn't die of a heart attack, she whispered, looking over her shoulder as if Santiago might materialize from the shadows. He was poisoned. Santiago did it. I found the drafts. I found the letters from the apothecary in London. She looked up into Anton's eyes, her gaze piercing him. Before I ran last night, I didn't just run from his assault. I ran because I had finally found the proof, a ledger he kept. It details the payments for the poison, the bribes to the coroner to falsify the death certificate. It proves everything. Anton gripped her hands tighter. Where is this ledger, Carmen? A ghost of a defiant smile touched her lips. I hid it. In the Stanhope Library, before I fled. In a place only I know. Anton understood now. The desperation in Vane's eyes hadn't just been about a lost fortune. It was about a noose tightening around his neck. Vane needed Carmen back not just to marry her, but to find out what she knew and silence her forever. He said you stole something, Anton murmured. He meant the ledger. If I go back, I am dead, she said simply. He will marry me, force me to sign over the estate. and then I will have an accident, just like my father." Anton looked down at the woman clinging to him. She was small, fragile, and utterly alone in the world, save for the freezing man she had screamed at only hours ago. But beneath the fear he saw a core of steel. She had survived the snow. She had survived Vane. A strange sensation washed over Anton, something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. He wasn't just existing in this frozen castle anymore. He had something to defend. He released her hands and stepped back, his expression hardening into resolve. "Then, we must get the ledger first," Anton said. "Vane said he would return with the magistrate. That buys us perhaps 24 hours, depending on the roads. We cannot wait here for him to bring the law down upon us." Carmen looked confused. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, Lady Carmen," Anton said, moving toward the wardrobe and throwing it open, "that you need to get dressed in something other than a dressing gown. We are leaving Blackwood." "Leaving? To go where?" Anton turned back to her, his dark eyes burning with a dangerous light. "To Stanhope Hall. To steal a ledger right from under the nose of the devil himself." The preparations were swift and silent. Anton had Mrs. Fairfax fetch a riding habit that had belonged to his late sister, heavy black wool that smelled of cedar and old memories. It was a little large on Carmen, swallowing her petite frame, but it was warm and practical. "We cannot take a carriage," Anton explained as he fastened a scabbard to his belt in the tack room. "Vane will have men watching the roads. A carriage is a hearse on wheels in this snow. We ride." Carmen looked at the massive black stallion Onyx, and then at the smaller, dappled mare Anton was saddling for her. Her face was pale, her injuries still throbbing, but she nodded. "I can ride. My father taught me before." She trailed off, the memory of better times too painful to voice. "Good." Anton didn't offer empty platitudes. He offered her a leg up. They rode out under the cover of a moonless sky. The storm had passed, but it had left the world buried in a silence so deep it felt heavy. The snow muffled the hooves of their horses as they cut through the dense Blackwood forest, avoiding the main turnpike. For the first hour, they didn't speak. The cold was a physical weight, biting through layers of wool and leather. Anton rode slightly ahead, his eyes scanning the tree line for movement. He was in his element here, the dark, the cold, the danger. But every time he glanced back at Carmen, a strange protectiveness flared in his chest, hotter than the brandy he'd drunk earlier. She wasn't complaining. She wasn't weeping. She was riding with a grim determination, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. "We are close," Anton said, pulling Onyx back to ride alongside her as they crested a ridge. Below them, nestled in a valley of silver shadows, lay Stanhope Hall. It was a sprawling Georgian beast of a house, far more modern and opulent than Anton's brooding castle. But tonight, it looked like a skull. Most of the windows were dark, save for a blaze of light on the ground floor, the library, and the main drawing room. "He is there," Carmen whispered, her voice trembling not from cold, but from rage. "Look at the lights! He is drinking my father's wine in my father's chair." "Not for long," Anton promised. He looked at her. "Carmen, you know the layout. Is there a way in that doesn't require walking through the front door?" "The servants. Entrance on the east wing," she said. "Or the conservatory. The glass is old. The latch on the third panel is broken. I used to sneak out that way when I was a child, to look at the stars." "The conservatory it is." They tied the horses deep in the woods, half a mile from the estate, and continued on foot. The snow was knee-deep in places, making the trek exhausting. Anton broke the path, using his large frame to shield Carmen from the wind. At one point she stumbled, her strength failing her. Anton caught her before she hit the ground. He didn't let go. He pulled her upright, his hands lingering on her waist. They were breaths apart in the freezing dark. He could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, the pulse fluttering in her throat. "I can carry you," he said, his voice rough. "I can walk," she countered, though she didn't pull away. "I am not broken, Anton." It was the first time she had used his name without a title. It stripped away the last barrier between them. "No," Anton murmured, brushing a stray lock of wet hair from her forehead. "You are not." The moment stretched, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the danger and everything to do with the heat rising between them. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to claim the life that Santiago Vane was trying to snuff out. But he stepped back. "Lead the way, Lady Carmen." They reached the conservatory without seeing a soul. Vane's arrogance was his weakness. He hadn't posted guards, assuming Carmen was dead and adrift somewhere. Carmen found the loose panel. With a soft click, it opened. The smell of damp earth and exotic flowers hit them, a stark contrast to the winter outside. They slipped inside, the glass fogging with their breath. "The library is through the ballroom and down the main corridor," Carmen whispered. "The ledger is hidden in the hollow base of the globe stand near the fireplace. Stay behind me," Anton commanded, drawing his pistol. They moved like ghosts through the darkened house. They passed the ballroom, silent and empty, the chandeliers collecting dust. But as they neared the library, the sound of laughter echoed down the hall. Drunken, raucous laughter. Anton signaled for Carmen to stop. He peered around the corner. The library doors were ajar. Inside, the fire was roaring. Santiago Vane was there, sprawled in a leather armchair, a goblet in one hand. But he wasn't alone. 2 other men were with him, rough-looking sorts, likely the hired help used for his dirty work, and a woman. She was draped across the arm of Vane's chair, laughing at something he said. She was wearing one of Carmen's mother's diamond necklaces. Carmen made a small, choked sound. Anton grabbed her arm to steady her. "My mother's necklace," she hissed. "That harlot is wearing my mother's necklace." "Focus, Carmen," Anton whispered in her ear. "Where is the globe?" "It's on the far side of the room," she replied, despair creeping into her voice. "Behind Vane's chair. We can't get to it without him seeing us." Anton assessed the room. 3 armed men, 1 civilian woman. He had 1 pistol and the element of surprise. It wasn't enough, not if he wanted to get Carmen out alive. "We need a distraction," Anton said. He looked around the hallway. His eyes landed on a heavy velvet curtain near a candelabra. "What are you going to do?" Carmen asked, eyes wide. "I'm going to create a diversion," Anton said grimly. "When they run to the noise, you slip in, get the ledger, and run back to the conservatory. Do not wait for me." "No, I won't leave you." "You will," he said, grabbing her shoulders. "Because without that ledger, Vane wins. Go." Before she could protest, Anton grabbed a heavy bronze bust from a pedestal in the hall. He hurled it with all his strength down the opposite corridor, toward the kitchens. Crash! The sound was explosive in the quiet house. "What the devil was that?" Vane's voice boomed from the library. "Someone's in the house," one of the men shouted. "Go check it! Now!" Vane yelled. Footsteps thundered. 2 of the men ran out, heading toward the noise. Vane stood up, swaying slightly, pulling a pistol from his waistband. He hesitated, then followed his men to the doorway, peering into the dark hall, his back to the library interior. "Now!" Anton pushed Carmen. She moved, low and fast, a shadow in her own home. She slipped into the library, while Vane was distracted by the hallway. She reached the large antique globe. Her fingers fumbled with the hidden latch at the base. Click! The panel slid open. Her hand darted inside. She felt the leather binding. The ledger. She grabbed it, clutching it to her chest. She turned to run. But the floorboard creaked. Vane turned. His watery eyes went wide, then narrowed into a look of pure, venomous delight. "Well, well," Vane sneered, raising his pistol. "The dead do return." Carmen froze. The ledger was pressed against her heart, her knuckles white. Vane stood in the doorway, blocking her only exit. The woman with the diamond necklace let out a small scream and scrambled behind the desk. "I knew you weren't dead," Vane slurred, taking a step into the room. The gun in his hand wavered, but at this range he couldn't miss. "You're too stubborn to die, Carmen, just like your father. He took a long time to stop breathing, you know." "You monster," Carmen spat, fear giving way to a cold hatred. "I have the ledger, Santiago. I have the proof, the poison, the bribes, everything," Vane laughed. "You have a book, my dear, and you are alone in a house filled with my men. Do you really think you're walking out of here?" She is not alone. Anton stepped out of the shadows of the hallway, directly behind Vane. Vane spun around, but Anton was faster. He struck Vane's wrist with the edge of his hand, sending the pistol clattering across the floor. In one fluid motion, Anton grabbed Vane by the throat and slammed him against the doorframe. "I told you, Vane," Anton snarled, his face inches from the Baron's. "I am not known for my mercy." "Get off me!" Vane gagged, clawing at Anton's iron grip. "Guards, help!" The two thugs who had investigated the noise were running back down the hall. Anton saw them over his shoulder. He threw Vane into the room, sending him crashing into a table of crystal decanters. "Carmen, the window!" Anton shouted, slamming the heavy oak doors of the library shut and throwing the bolt just as the thugs slammed into it from the other side. The wood splintered, but held. "There's no latch on these windows," Carmen cried, rushing to the tall casements that looked out onto the snowy terrace. "They're painted shut." Vane was scrambling to his feet, blood trickling from his nose. He looked around wildly, spotting his fallen pistol near the fireplace. Anton saw it too. They both lunged. Anton was stronger, but Vane was desperate. Vane kicked out, catching Anton in the knee. Anton stumbled. Vane dove for the gun. "No!" Carmen screamed. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She grabbed the heavy crystal globe from its stand and brought it down on Vane's outstretched arm, just as his fingers brushed the weapon. Vane howled in agony, the bones snapping audibly. Anton recovered instantly. He kicked the pistol into the fire. He grabbed Vane by his lapels and hauled him up, pinning him against the mantel. The door behind them shuddered violently. An axe bit through the wood. The thugs were breaking in. "We're trapped," Carmen gasped, looking at the splintering door. Anton looked at Vane, then at the window, then at Carmen. The room was a cage. The door would give way in seconds. Vane's men would kill Anton and take Carmen. There was no way out. Unless... Anton pulled Vane close, his eyes dark voids of intent. "Call them off. Go to hell," Vane spat, clutching his broken arm. "They'll kill you, and I'll have her anyway." "If they enter this room," Anton said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "I will not fight them. I will kill you. Instantly. I will snap your neck before they take a single step inside. Do you understand me, Santiago? You value your miserable life above all else. Call them off." Anton tightened his grip on Vane's throat. Vane's face turned purple. He looked into Anton's eyes and saw the truth. The Duke was ready to die, but he would take Vane with him. The axe slammed through the door again. A hand reached through to slide the bolt. "Stop!" Vane shrieked, his voice cracking. "Stop! Don't come in!" The hacking stopped. "Boss!" A rough voice called from the hall. "Stand down!" Vane wheezed, terrified by the pressure on his windpipe. "Back away from the door!" "Smart lad," Anton growled. He shifted his grip, turning Vane around to use him as a human shield, facing the ruined door. "Carmen, get behind me!" "What are we going to do?" Carmen asked, clutching the ledger. "We are going to walk out of here," Anton said, "and the Baron is going to escort us." Anton marched Vane toward the door. "Open it, Carmen." Slowly. Carmen slid the bolt back. The door creaked open. The two thugs were there, axes raised, looking confused. When they saw the Duke of Blackwood holding their employer by the throat, and seeing the unnatural angle of Vane's arm, they hesitated. "Drop the axes," Anton commanded. or he dies." "Do it, you idiots!" Vane screamed. "Drop them!" The weapons clattered to the floor. "Back up! To the wall!" The men retreated. Anton, Carmen, and their hostage moved into the hallway. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Every step was a gamble. "You won't get away with this, Blackwood." Vane whimpered, sweat pouring down his face. "Kidnapping a peer of the realm? You'll hang." "I'm not kidnapping you," Anton said coolly. "I'm making a citizen's arrest. Lady Carmen holds the evidence of murder. We are going to the magistrate. But we are taking my carriage." They reached the foyer. The front doors were looming ahead. Freedom was visible. But just as they reached the threshold, Vane threw his weight backward. It was a suicidal move, born of pure spite. He hooked his leg around Anton's injured knee. Anton buckled. His grip slipped for a fraction of a second. "Kill him!" Vane screamed, rolling away. The thugs, sensing the opening, charged. "Carmen, run!" Anton shouted, shoving her toward the open door. "No!" Anton didn't have time to argue. He turned to meet the charge. The first man swung a heavy fist. Anton ducked and drove an uppercut into his jaw, but the second man tackled him. They went down hard on the marble floor. Anton was a powerful man, but he was outnumbered. He took a heavy blow to the ribs, then another to the face. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered wolf, but he was pinned. Vane stood up, clutching his broken arm, his face twisted in a rictus of triumph. He picked up one of the dropped axes with his good hand. He walked over to where Anton was being held down by the two men. "I told you," Vane hissed, standing over Anton. "I will burn your world down." He raised the axe. Carmen stood in the doorway. She had the ledger. She could run. She could save the evidence. She could save herself. But looking at Anton, the man who had warmed her frozen hands, who had believed her, who was about to die for her, something in Carmen broke, and something else was born. She didn't run away. She ran back in. She didn't have a weapon, but she had the truth. "Santiago!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Vane paused, the axe hovering in the air. He looked at her. "If you drop that axe," she said, her voice steady and loud, "I will give you the ledger." The room went silent. Anton stopped struggling, staring at her with wide eyes. "Carmen, no!" "The ledger," Carmen said, holding the book over the roaring fire in the foyer's massive hearth. "The only proof of your crimes. Let him go. Let him walk out of here, and I will burn it myself." Vane stared at the book. It was his life, his freedom. If that book existed, he would hang. If it burned, he was untouchable. He looked at Anton, bleeding on the floor. Then, at the book. "You're lying," Vane sneered. "Am I?" Carmen leaned closer to the flames. The leather cover began to smoke. "I just want this to end, Santiago. I want to live. Let him go, and I will destroy the evidence." Vane lowered the axe slowly. "Let him up," he told his men. The thugs stepped back. Anton scrambled to his feet, swaying. He looked at Carmen, agony in his eyes. "Don't do it, Carmen. He'll kill us both anyway." "Go, Anton," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Get your horse. Leave." "I'm not leaving you." "You must," she screamed. "Please, just go." Vane laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "A touching sacrifice." "Very well. Duke, get out, before I change my mind." Anton looked at Vane, then at Carmen. He saw the look in her eyes. It wasn't defeat. It was calculation. He took a step backward, then another. He walked out into the snow, leaving the woman he loved in the hands of the devil. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him. The lock turned. Inside, Vane smiled. "Now, my dear wife." "Give me the book." Carmen stood by the fire. She looked at the door Anton had just exited. Then she looked at Vane. "You think I'm weak?" she whispered. "I think you're smart." Vane stepped closer. "Give it to me." Carmen smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "I am a Stanhope," she said, "and we do not negotiate with murderers." She threw the book into the fire. Vane screamed and lunged for the fireplace to retrieve it. But as he did, Carmen pulled the pistol, the one Anton had kicked into the library. Fire earlier, the one she had retrieved and hidden in her skirts while they were barricaded, out of her pocket. It was hot, burning her palm, but she didn't care. Vane spun around, realizing too late that the book in the fire was a decoy, a random volume she had grabbed from the table near the door. The real ledger was tucked into the back of her corset. "You lose, Santiago," she said, and she pulled the trigger. The report of the pistol was deafening in the confined stone foyer. Santiago Vane didn't fall immediately. He looked down at his chest, where a blossom of crimson was rapidly spreading across his silk waistcoat. His mouth opened, but no sound came out, only a bubble of blood. He looked at Carmen with an expression of profound confusion, as if he couldn't conceive of a world where his property bit back. Then, his knees gave way. He collapsed backward, hitting the marble floor with a wet thud. The two hired thugs froze. They looked at their fallen employer, then at the woman standing by the fireplace, smoke curling from the barrel of the pistol in her shaking hand. Her palm was blistered from the heat of the weapon, but she didn't seem to feel it. Her eyes were fixed on Vane's motionless body. "Get her!" one of the men roared, shaking off his shock. He pulled a knife from his boot and lunged. Carmen tried to raise the pistol again, but it was spent. She braced herself, closing her eyes. Crash! The stained glass window beside the front door exploded inward in a shower of colored shards. Anton Thorne came through the ruin like an avenging angel. He hadn't left. He had never intended to leave. He had used the time to scale the portico and find a breach point. He hit the man with the knife at full speed, tackling him to the ground. The momentum carried them both sliding across the floor. Anton didn't hesitate. He delivered a single bone-shattering blow to the man's temple, knocking him unconscious instantly. The second thug, seeing the Duke of Blackwood rise from the debris with blood on his face and murder in his eyes, dropped his axe. He threw his hands up. "I yield!" he screamed. "I was just paid to stand guard. I didn't touch her." Anton ignored him. He stepped over the unconscious man and rushed to Carmen. She was still standing by the fire, trembling so violently she looked as if she might shatter. As Anton reached her, the adrenaline abandoned her. Her knees buckled. Anton caught her. He pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her as if he could shield her from the horror of the last 24 hours. She buried her face in his coat, sobbing, great, heaving breaths that tore through her body. "It's over," Anton whispered into her hair, kissing the top of her head. "I have you. I'm not letting go." "I shot him," she gasped, pulling back to look at Vane. "Is he—" Anton looked at the Baron. Vane was still breathing, but it was shallow and ragged. "He is alive. Unfortunately." Anton turned to the remaining thug. "You. Tie your friend up. Then go to the stables and hitch the carriage. If you try to run, I will hunt you down, and I will not be as gentle as her ladyship." The dawn brought the magistrate, a stern man named Sir Roberts, accompanied by a troop of constables. Anton had sent his groom for them hours ago, before they had even left Blackwood Manor, another gamble that had paid off. The scene at Stanhope Hall was grim, but the evidence was irrefutable. While Dr. Sterling tended to Vane's gunshot wound, a survivable injury to the shoulder, and Carmen's burns, Sir Roberts sat in the library, reviewing the ledger Carmen had pulled from her corset. It was all there: the purchase of arsenic, the payments to the coroner, the forged gambling markers Vane had used to indebt Carmen's father. It was a diary of a sociopath. When Vane was hauled away on a stretcher, shackled to the frame, he spat curses at Carmen. "You are nothing!" he screamed as the constables dragged him out into the snow. "You will rot alone in this house. No man will want a woman with blood on her hands." Anton stood on the steps. his arm around Carmen's waist. He looked down at the broken villain. "She is not alone," Anton said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "And she will not be in this house. She will be in mine." Vane's eyes widened in realization as he was shoved into the prisoner wagon. The heavy doors of the wagon slammed shut, sealing Santiago Vane in the darkness he deserved. The hard karma he had courted for years had finally come to collect. He would hang before the spring thaw. 3 months later, the winter that had nearly killed them had finally retreated. The moors of northern England, once a white graveyard, were now alive with the vibrant purple of heather and the green of new grass. Blackwood Manor had changed too. The heavy velvet drapes that had been drawn for a decade were pulled back, letting sunlight flood the dusty corridors. Carmen sat in the garden, a book resting on her lap. She wasn't reading. She was watching Anton teach a new foal how to accept a halter in the paddock below. She touched the scar on her palm, a small pink mark where the hot pistol had burned her. It was a reminder of the night she had taken her life back. She was no longer Lady Carmen Stanhope, the victim. She was the woman who had walked through fire and ice. Anton handed the lead rope to a stable hand and walked up the hill toward her. He had changed. The darkness that had clung to him like a second skin was gone, replaced by a quiet peace. He still didn't smile often, but when he looked at her, his eyes were warm. "You look deep in thought," he said, sitting on the stone bench beside her. "I was thinking about the snow," she admitted, "how it hides things, and how it reveals them." Anton took her hand, the scarred one, and raised it to his lips. "It brought you to me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It wasn't new. The velvet was worn, the hinge stiff. "This belonged to my grandmother," Anton said, his voice suddenly unsure. "She was a formidable woman. She once held off a band of thieves with nothing but a fire poker. I think she would have liked you very much." Carmen's breath hitched. Anton opened the box. Inside sat a ring of emerald and diamond, the green matching her eyes, the diamond matching the ice that had forged their bond. "I am a man of few words, Carmen," Anton said softly. "I have lived in winter for a very long time. But you are my spring. Will you do me the honor of becoming the Duchess of Blackwood? Will you stay with me, not for protection, but for love?" Carmen looked at the ring, then at the man who had carried her through the blizzard. She didn't see a duke. She saw her partner, her equal. Tears pricked her eyes, but they were not tears of fear. "Yes," she whispered. Then, louder, "Yes, Anton." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He kissed her, and for the first time in years the Lord of Winter smiled. High above them, on the ridges of the moor, the last patch of snow melted away, soaking into the earth to nourish the roots of something new, something unbreakable. The storm was over. And that is the story of Lady Carmen and the Duke of Blackwood. From a frozen body in the snow to a woman who took down a tyrant, Carmen's journey proves that even in the coldest winter, the human spirit can burn bright enough to melt the ice. Santiago Vane thought he could bury his crimes, but he forgot one thing. Karma doesn't care how rich you are, and it certainly doesn't care about the cold. He rotted in a cell while Carmen and Anton rebuilt their lives in the sun. If this story gave you chills or if you cheered when Carmen pulled that trigger, please hit the like button. It helps the channel immensely. What would you have done in Carmen's shoes? Would you have burned the book? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story of love, betrayal, and justice. Thanks for watching.